Okay, so on number 1 and 2, the directions say to use a calculator. So we're going to use a calculator. Now, I am going to take points off if you don't round to the where the directions tell you to round. So this one, the directions tell us to round to the nearest hundredth. Okay, so depending on your calculator, you either type in the number first and then hit the square root sign, or vice versa. So hopefully everybody knows which order you type it in. So for this calculator right here, I type in the number first and then I hit the square root sign. So the nearest hundredth, right here, this is the ones, the tenths, the hundredths. So look at the number behind it. And it tells me I gotta bump it up. So the answer to this one is 1.01. Okay?
Was that completely wrong to do the 0, 1?
Half. Okay? And then on number 2, same thing. So, oops. So I type in the number first and hit the square root sign. So I'm rounding to this place value spot. So it's going to end up being 17.58.
If we have 17.59, is that wrong?
Half. Because we've got to know where and how to round. Okay, so for 3 and 4, it says write both solutions. Remember, that's going to be your plus and minus sign.
For number 2, when I just square root 309, this is 0.
Oh, there's a special button you have to push on that. So, yeah, you have to do. I can show you how to do that. She knows how to do it on the computer. So, calculator. So when it says write both solutions of the equation, that means plus and minus. So it's going to be the same number, but the positive and the negative version. So here, what's being done to y is being squared, 7's being added to it. So I've got to work reverse order of operations, which means that I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides. When I do that, these cancel, and I'm left with 71 from both sides, I get that. Is that my answer? I have to do what? I have to take the square root, which ends up being that. If I round it to the third decimal place, it's going to end up being 17.861. Number 9. Number 9. Yes, this one's number 9. All right. get close. The hypotenuse equals just the leg, and neither one of them is longer or shorter. The leg times the square root of 2. Yeah, neither one of them is, because they're the equal length. Both of those legs are equal length. Okay, so that's what, so make sure that you do know how to use that one as well. Okay, now going down to number 13. They want us to find the sine of angle C. Okay, and remember, the sine equals the opposite over the hypotenuse. So here's angle C right here. So it's the opposite, oops, sorry, the opposite, which is 7, over the hypotenuse, which is what? And you can leave it like that.
This one's what I just don't know the hypotenuse of the house.
Then it's wrong.
Yeah.
Because that would be 2 completely different numbers. Now, if you actually worked it out, this is what it would be. So, I have to do it like this first. You have to find out what the square root of 74 is, which is that. So, 8.6. So then you would leave it like that. Or if you actually divided it out, 7 divided by 8.6, it equals this right here, 0.81. So, pretty much any of these would be correct. Okay. So, the higher up that you get in math, the more common it is to be able to leave the answer like this first one. Okay. So, in simplest form, I think that's the simplest form. So, and we'll do more of that next year. We'll do more of this next year. So it'll be a review. It'll definitely be a review. Number 14. It says, find the cosine of angle C. Now the cosine equals the adjacent over the hypotenuse. So here's the cosine. The adjacent is 5. The hypotenuse is the square root of 74. So you could have left it like that. If you actually worked it out, the square root of 74 is 8.6 again. So you could have written it as 5 over 8.6 as well. Okay. Either one of those would be okay. Alright. And then number 15, I'm going to guess, is the tangent. Okay. And the tangent is the opposite over the adjacent, okay, to angle C. So the opposite is 7, and the adjacent is 5, and you would leave it just like that. Okay, so just gotta know. And again, I am going to write those up here for you. I will write those up here for you. I'm not expecting you to memorize those ratios. I will tell you that you have to have them memorized in geometry. The trick is this. So, toa. Sine is the opposite over the hypotenuse. Cosine is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. Tangent is the opposite of the adjacent. So that's kind of the trick that people use to memorize it. Again, I'm not gonna, it kind of sounds like Latin or Greek or something like that. But, yeah, something. I don't know who came up with that, but I mean, that was something I was taught. Like, I was taught that when I was in school to remember. So, again, I'm going to provide those for you, but you will have to have those memorized later in math. I'm not going to make you memorize it this year because it's the first time you've seen it. Okay? Number 16 says, solve the triangle for its unlabeled angle and side. Then write 6 trigonometric ratios that could be formed. Okay, so let's start with the first. Solve the triangle for its unlabeled angle and side. Well, here's 30, 90, what goes here? 60. 30, 60, 90. Now, if you didn't know that, you could have added up 90 and 30 and subtracted it from 180 because all of the angles add up So again, we've got the total. Okay, so the sign of 60 is going to be the opposite, which is this, 10 over the square root of 3, times the square root of 3, over the opposite over the adjacent. The adjacent is, I'm sorry, not the opposite of the adjacent, the opposite over the hypotenuse. And the hypotenuse is 20. So you could technically leave it like that. If you didn't, if you broke it down, you would have taken the square root of 3 times 10 and gotten 17.32 over 20, which is fine too. If you actually divided it out from there, it would have been 0.8 6. Oh, that's fine. Let me see how they're writing this too. Yeah, there it is, 0.866. Okay, so we go back. So they wrote it again like this. Or the other way to do this technically is simplify it from here, because both 10 and 20 can be divided by 2. Or 10, I'm sorry. So this would go away and you could have just written it as the square root of 3 over 2. I would take these answers. Okay. The cosine, the easiest thing to do, the way to not get overwhelmed, is just to leave it like this one that I boxed. Okay, the cosine equals what? The adjacent. So the adjacent to 60 is 10 over the hypotenuse, which is 20, which reduces to what? 1/2, right? So that's the easiest to write that way. And the tangent is what? The opposite over the adjacent. So the opposite of 60 is 10 times the square root of 3, and the adjacent was 10, which these two cancel out, and you're just left with the square root of 3. I would have taken either one of those though. Now, for angle 30, the sine, angle 30, the opposite, which is 10, over the hypotenuse, which is 20, so this one reduces to 1/2. The cosine, which is the adjacent, 10 times the square root of 3, over the hypotenuse, which is 20. So you could leave it like that, or you could have just written it as the square root of 3 over 2. Either one of those. And the tangent, which is the opposite, which is 10, over the adjacent, which is 10 times the square root of 3, which that would have reduced to just 1 over the square root of 3. But I would have taken either one of those answers. Okay? So it's just a matter of knowing which one is the opposite, which one is the hypotenuse, which one is the adjacent. But remember, the hypotenuse is always opposite the right angle. Okay? Last one, I think it was very similar, right? Kind of the same thing. Yeah, same directions. Okay, so how would I know what the missing angle measure is here? Okay, every triangle, what do its angles add up to be? 180 degrees. Okay, so this is 90. This is 36 plus what equals 180? So if I took 180 and subtracted 36 and then subtracted 90, what's left over?